periods. Let's talk about it, okay? And so that's what virgin actually means.
It's just gotta stick together.
What do I always say? Listen to your pussy.
She never lies.
Sister Strain here.
Your favorite feisty feminist filmmaking duo.
You're listening to The Sister Strain. Hey, hi.
Hi, we're back.
So sometimes when we get in here, we're like, okay, raring to go. I got all my stats.
We're feisty, we're locked and loaded.
And then there's some topics, like today's, that we've been mulling over this for a while.
Yeah, it's been percolating, and I think it's been percolating with everybody. The male loneliness epidemic. We all, I'm sure, have very strong feelings and very particular feelings about that.
Talked about a lot, especially if you're on social media. Talked about by both men and women, scholars, professionals, psychologists,
and otherwise.
and just personal opinions.
Everyman. I think if we recorded this episode last week, we'd have a very specific mindset about this topic for various reasons. But knowing that we were doing this podcast, we decided to, as you should always, explore some other perceptions beyond our own, do some research, do a little digging, and really look into it a little bit further.
And to be honest, I'm like, even though we're about to present some findings and talk about our thoughts on it, it's still just perplexing, or like it's still a little, a little open. It's just
Okay, let's start with like our initial reaction to that, which I think a lot of women will likely share, is like, okay, just like male loneliness epidemic. We have all these things, so many things in the female experience that aren't talked about, aren't studied, are kind of swept under the rug. And then this sort of feels like this was where we were sitting, was like this male loneliness somehow is considered an epidemic, and there's all of these conversations and all of these studies and, projects being made about it, and it's this huge conversation. It's this topic of debate and care and concern. And I think initially, it's like, okay, so if something's happening to men, we're doing studies, we're really looking into it, we're really figuring out how we fix this problem. But then there's so many things in the female experience that are just completely bypassed.
Well, in particular, so I receive emails from Movember because I've donated them to in the past. I knew people who grew out the mustache and did the whole campaigns, and I've donated to them. And so I get frequent emails from them. And I got one that was a study of young gentlemen, adults, on men and masculinity influencers online, and whether they're taking part in viewing these, what they're kind of gaining from them. And so they did a study. Movember printed it out. I don't know who. It's through a couple different organizations. I'm not going to get into specifics, but I received this email. There's a whole report. You can read the whole report.
It's like a 49-page study.
It's like a 3,048 between, I think, 16 and
25 in the U.S., the UK, and Australia.
In Australia, yes. And so some of them, followed one men and male masculinity influencer. Some followed more than that. Some didn't really follow them. And so they did this broad study and asked a lot of questions. And the first thing that came to mind was like, okay, we can't seem to get any studies on the epidemic of endometriosis in women.
Or PMS, chronic pain, autoimmune disorders in women. Like, there's just so many things we know that.
The second we see how culturally online influence is affecting men especially, we immediately organize and orchestrate, get the funds, get the people together, and gather 3,000 young gentlemen to do a study. So the first thing that went off in our head was like, really? That's our culture.
All the things unstudied. And that is not saying this isn't an important topic to look into. It's just when you really think about all the things that get swept aside and, again, brushed under the rug or forgotten and ignored and deemed not worthy of investing time, money, and energy into studying,
then,
in the female experience, it's like, you want to get your back up. You want to be like, fuck that.
Okay, of course, yes. Of course we did the study on the gentleman. And, again...
But they did the study, and so we read it.
They did the study, and so, let's just, I'm not going to dig too far into it. Again, we always share our resources. I will add it as a link to a resource, so you can go and check out the study yourself. But a couple of the key kind of takeaways that were garnered from it. So during the study, 2/3 of the young men who were in the study regularly engaged with men and masculinity influencers, and mostly in the areas that they're promoting are fitness, financial success, and relationship advice. Now, while these young gentlemen said that they went to these influencers and channels because they found it entertaining, motivating, and inspiring, they also simultaneously reported worse mental health outcomes, a reduced willingness to address making mental health a priority, and also a higher rate of risk task. What's the word I want to say? Risk task activities. So whether that's like taking steroids or working out when you're injured, like kind of all the things we know to be in our society pushed for masculinity. You have to make money and be successful. You have to work out and be super fit, and that means
essentially saying these adolescent boys are really looking for sources of inspiration and guidance as far as what makes a masculine, what makes a man a masculine, what makes a man a man. And so the easiest way they're finding to source this information is online because it's so accessible. And although some of these male influencers are teaching really healthy things like devote to yourself, build your self-esteem, work on your body, really commit to your career, they're also oftentimes promoting unhealthy behaviors like
pushing
workaholism or steroid use or
prioritizing money and body over relationship forming,
family connections and healthy bonding and that sort of thing.
So they're going to these places because they're looking for the motivation and the inspiration. They're looking for examples of the masculinity that they're supposed to kind of be taking on. But 27% of these young adults who are finding this stuff motivating are also suffering with feelings of worthlessness because they see what these online influencers are doing and they don't feel like they could actually have that or achieve that, or they feel like far away from those. Yeah. Now, one of the things that we did want to bring up because we found it pretty alarming is that although the young gentlemen who were following these influencers reported that they had more traditional attitudes towards gender roles in relationships and society, they had more negative and limiting attitudes towards women and their roles in the relationship, and they had higher levels of feeling frustration in dating.
Which is what we expected.
Yes, but what was alarming to us is that even though the numbers were less, the young adults who were not engaging with these influencers also still were like 50% or higher.
Very similar viewpoints on
the same thing. So there is a lot of negativity around women and relationships at present time. And one of the expressions that got brought up in this, when we talk about high value women or high value men, and they're like, feminism and the fight for equality is a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game for everyone involved. And I'm like, if I could never hear zero-sum game or high value man, high value women, like,
makes me want to vomit.
Even mean?
We all inherently have value just by existing. Okay.
Yeah. So that was alarming, though. Like, we expected that. Yes, so we're talking toxic masculinity. We're talking about traditional gender roles. We expected there to be maybe a little more adverse reaction, especially in today's dating world with the way women are kind of the expectations that we are putting forward more or being more expressive about. I didn't necessarily expect for the young adults who aren't following these influencers to still feel the divide.
Yeah. And so obviously we thought it was important to look at some male perspective. So that study was conducted by, with the masculine frame in mind.
Oh, before we go on, I just wanted to say I have here some of the graphs that show what they asked specifically in regards to relationships and kind of gender roles. I'm going to put these on the screen one at a time. I'm taking my time
testing
here.
This? Okay.
One at a time.
Something new.
So you can go ahead and you can press pause if you want to take a look at the stats.
I'll flash, zoom in, take a look.
We're going to continue on, but I'll do a couple of them, and you can just press pause when you want to, so you can take a look at the stats.
And of course, we'll link the study as well if anyone wants to do some light reading.
Okay, Kitty, take us away.
So I also did a little research, and I looked at the site, the Good Men Project. So again, this is content that's written by men for men about the male experience. And they also had this article on male loneliness and why it's happening. And one of the biggest things is social isolation, right? They're finding in young men that they don't seem to have as budding relationships as young women do in that sense of social connection. And a couple of the reasons why, right? So one, there's not as much priority on maintaining friendships as young males seem to age. Job insecurity. When men lack stable employment, it affects their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth. And obviously at that age, they're sort of figuring themselves out and figuring out, how do I make my way independently in the world? So that can sometimes be a little bit consuming. And then just the masculinity norms that we have in our society, outdated beliefs that men should be stoic and self-reliant providers, and discourage them from asking for help or expressing vulnerability. So again, at that particular age, when they're trying to make their way independently, and that's what society is deeming normal, you're self-providing, you're secure on your own. A lot of these men are like, I don't feel that. How do I find that, right? And so technology is a big source of that. This website, they've suggested technology is sort of the problem and the solution. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Social media and dating apps, although they are great for providing the opportunity of a promising connection, right? You can meet people, you can date.
It's at your fingertips.
Everything is there. You can have everything you want. Oftentimes, and I think this is everyone, non-gender specific, that what we're actually seeing on social media oftentimes is like a small percentage of people's actual experience, and it ends up making us feel rejected and or inadequate.
Inadequate.
Like we're seeing the best case scenario. For young men specifically, and I've actually read a little bit further about this, virtual substitutes, right? So if young men are feeling like they don't have as many human connections, or it's not been prioritized for them, they might seek that sense of connection virtually. Video games, which we all know can be harmful and encourage some poor behavior. Some of the games that are out there now, like you saw one recently.
I don't know the name of it. My partner was telling me about it because he gamed more, I think, before, and he still does occasionally, but he had signed a petition recently for a game that is out on the market where you can actually like assault and abuse and rape other people. It's just like women, characters children, in the game, and it's quite violent and quite graphic. Of course, if humans are able to enact these actions in a game setting where there's no consequences, like how does that translate into
it reality? Normalizes it, right?
Yeah, because it's like the more you see something, the more it just becomes, it's like violence.
You become desensitized.
It's like violence and sexual assault and that on screen that we see a lot, and we've become desensitized to it as a society because we see it all the time.
Yeah. Another one, and this is a big one, being pornography, right?
Yeah.
We think a couple of generations back, of course it could be found like nude magazines or Playboys or whatever, and maybe young men would find their father's stash, or a friend had it and it was a little more like obscure and hard to find, right? But nowadays you can find it almost any variety, any time of day, anywhere online. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of mimicking it's replacing finding that intimate connection with real people, right? And I'll go back to this lovely vagina book, which I love to refer to. I'm obsessed. Naomi is my favorite. She talks in there about how she did some studies about pornography, right? The fact that it is so accessible means if a man can access pornography and it feels good, obviously, right? It's a dopamine hit, so then you want to do it more and more and more. The problem with that being what you're looking at eventually becomes unstimulating. So you have to keep sourcing more and different and more extreme and more excitable, right? So you get to the place where
you gotta up the ante.
Yeah, young men nowadays, when they are watching or consuming so much porn, they're becoming desensitized to the sort of standard ways of relating between man and woman, which is, softness, intimacy, and they're looking at this porn that really encourages some aggressive behavior, like escalated aggressive behavior, and also
it's power, it's dominance,
control, right? That
we're talking about
control,
the
and
idea of masculinity in our society. What is that? It's the leader, it's the dominant. Even the study, they showed that the young gentlemen, they believe they should be the leader. They should have control, the dominant one in their household, in their relationships.
And also when they're watching pornography, right? These women are hired actors in these projects, in these films, if you will. it's not promoting healthy male-female relationships or healthy relationships between two individuals. It's not promoting the intimacy of knowing someone and connection and softness and,
or having
romance.
those conversations about.
It's more so it's like two bodies just using each other, right? Or one body being used for the pleasure of most often the masculine, right? So they're just the behaviors are aggressing to the point where now a lot of young men, because that's been their proxy for intimacy, they're holding young women or their love interest in real life to those standards, which is not how a lot of people want to operate, right? Not how a lot of young women want to engage in sexual intimacy. We want to be treated with respect. We want romance. We want it to be a mutual coming together and enjoying of a romantic and intimate experience. And one of the things she was saying was she went to 2 universities to give her lecture about what she was studying about pornography addictions and how bad they're becoming. One school being a very liberal university and one school being a very Christian university. And she said that she was at both universities, the healthcare professional that stood in on this and listened to her seminar, at both universities came to her after and said, my number one concern right now is the amount of anal fissures we're seeing in young women on campus. Obviously, for very different reasons. At the more Christian university, might be more so because of
birth control,
the idolization of virginity, right? Yeah. That sort of thing. At the other university, it was more so when they speak to the women, it's these behaviors are being pushed more and encouraged more because they're being seen a lot more in pornography. And I'm not poo-pooing it, right? To each their own, whatever that's the expression you have to use. Yeah, I'm not saying it's taboo or bad. No, I'm just saying it's become a lot more common, and why we're seeing these injuries in young women is because maybe it was, for lack of a better word, thrust upon them without their enjoyment or engagement. Maybe they weren't prepared, right? There's a lot of preparation that goes into certain types of intimacy that both partners need to be ready for the engagement.
You're watching it done on a screen and they're not showing the efforts that go into it, like using more lubrication, starting
taking
slow
your time
and steady, or working up to it, or that some people, that's generally one of their turn-ons, so like they may be naturally more lubricated or naturally more relaxed than other people.
And if you're watching, say, pornography and viewing that type of sexual engagement, chances are that person is probably already previously engaged in it, so they know what to expect, and their body is prepared. Whereas maybe a lot of these young women felt pressured to do it because it's becoming more common, and they feared they would lose the opportunity or not get that sense of connection with their partner if they didn't give in, and so they're just not prepared for this, and they're ending up injured, and that's unfortunate because this is really altering the ways that we're able to relate to each other in intimate relationships, and especially if young men aren't prioritizing or finding a lot of opportunity to create friendships, but they're still craving relationships. If you don't know how to nurture that sense of intimacy with a partner or build those healthy types of relationships, and you're finding that frustration in dating, which a lot of these young men were, well, that might be the reason why you're not really certain how to behave with an actual human being because you're being shown unrealistic virtual substitutes.
When we're talking about like relationships or like building community, it's like both from just lived experience, like what I'm seeing from males in the circles of my life, or what I'm seeing from women too, or even conversations we've had a lot recently during our documentary research, which is women of all ages. That I see that women are more, from my experience, they seemed like women are lonely too. I see a lot of women who are single. I've
been single 7 years.
Who would prefer not to be. And what do you do in regards to that? You are curious, you're knowledgeable, like you go out there, you learn new stuff, you put yourself in scenarios to meet other people, to build your social circles. Our good friend Meg, who's been single and dating, she does different sports teams, she signs up for different activities, she's curious, and she gets out there and she builds these, or she plans times with her other friends. And from what I've seen from some of the gentlemen, I see them feel the same thing, but they're staying in their isolation. They're staying in their kind of safer pockets of, or like not just, I don't know. I'm like, not being doesn't seem to
Not
be
being
that
as
curiosity
curious
to like
or putting
go
themselves out there.
And I've seen that a lot in the videos we've watched, or the topics that are coming up too, of like of why is that? I see if men are, you know, genuinely feeling these, and this lack of connection, this lack of socialization. It's like, are you reading new books? Are you going out and joining different community engagements? Are you volunteering your time? Are you joining a different sports group? There are ways to go out and be more engaged. It's unfortunate that there seems to be a divide between men and women in our current state, but I see women doing activities, or like actively going out to kind of affect
and that's
it.
sort of what, so the Good Men Project, this article where I got this information from, and these suggestions for men of what to do to break the cycle of male loneliness, right, is about that. Build new connections, sign up for clubs. When you're in spaces where you feel like people, you connect with them, they have similar interests and themes, you have that sense of belonging. That would take some of that loneliness away. Reconnect with old friends, talk about it. Admitting that you're lonely is not a weakness, right? It's the first step to fixing the problem. But unfortunately, we live in a society where, for a lot of young men, a lot of men in general, that's seen as a weakness. That you're not allowed to be vulnerable. You couldn't possibly let anyone know that you're not doing okay.
And I wanted to add on to that point that, like, that has come up a lot too, of when we talk about masculinity, what it means to be masculine. That is one of the beliefs. It's not masculine to be kind of sensitive and emotive and communicative.
To ask for help.
But also what I've been watching too, and a lot of the kind of stories or talks that are coming up around this, there's a lot of men addressing the issues. But what I saw one woman note, and I was like, yeah, that's curious. There seems to be apprehension. It's like they'll put the problems out. They'll talk about how it's affecting society and kind of ways to fix it, but they will never acknowledge it, They will never attribute it. To our patriarchal structure, and that's kind of where
There's
problem
always
really
something
comes in.
or someone else to blame.
That it is the patriarchal structures of our society are not kind to anyone. We can, as feminists, we can talk about how unkind they are to women. As intersectional feminists, we can talk about and promote how unkind they are to all types of marginalized and underrepresented groups in our society. But they're also unkind to men. But there doesn't seem to be, I have struggled to see a lot of examples of men attributing the problem to patriarchy.
Blatantly saying, hey, these are the problems that are happening. It's because of the structures, our societal structures, and we need to change them.
I was just going to add that I did find a couple of really awesome on Instagram gentlemen who are working in this sphere of trying to put more positive content and helpful content out for both men and women who are trying to understand the current climate with men. I also will add those resources in. But yeah, and I found one, and he mentioned a couple others. So I think, if you start going down that thread, you can find a bunch of them to be kind of getting that content into your feed. And also, if you have any young gentlemen in your life, it might be a good idea to have to share those profiles with them, or even any men in your life. Maybe be like, hey, curious for you to check this out. What are your thoughts on this?
I think at the end of the day, if you do consider yourself a feminist, then we're not here to only be fighting for women's rights. It's the changing the structure of society so that all humans can be seen, celebrated, and benefit for the strengths that they have in the ways they want to live their life, right?
And that's kind of why we not changed our mind, but we looked at it from a fresh perspective this week. The issue of the male loneliness, of how are we as feminists, or how as society as a whole, how can we work towards kind of not leaving men out of the issues that patriarchy has presented to all of the participants.
And there was
a
couple things we stumbled upon this week that really opened that mindset of it is good to consider these male perspectives and to pursue that and diversify the things I'm looking at to take in that perspective and to consider it, so that I know how I can share those resources, or how I can alter my perspective to make sure that I'm not only just thinking about female benefits and or centering on how the patriarchy affects the female experience, right?
And
it affects us all.
And I was going to say, I think a big thing too that we have to just know is people and I think men also are really getting caught up with the word patriarchy and putting patriarchy and men in the same pocket. And it's like, no, they're two separate things. Patriarchy is the societal structure that we're built on, the triangle of hierarchy that happens to be men on top. That's how we said it. Men are not the patriarchy. Feminism isn't against men. Feminism is against the patriarchal structures. And I actually was even looking, and I was reading a book. I won't get too far into this. We'll talk about this probably next season, but a book called White Fragility, and she was talking about in our society and how it's set up, and how it's set up for individualism. We are set up to be, you constantly put yourself as like better than the people around you. Like that's how we are born and raised.
Our society promotes disconnection.
Within the whiteness, specifically in our culture of like individualism, you want to be the top of the triangle, you want to build your own triangles of power, and you want to be at the top. And I think that's a big thing that like can attribute to where men are maybe struggling right now of like, they're taught to be the top of the triangle, and they're like, but I'm not, and I don't see how to get there.
If you think about these man influencer that the study's based about, right? Why we're looking into young men looking and following male influencers is because one of the things that's suggested to help men out of this loneliness epidemic is working on your self-improvement, right? And a lot of these male influencers do promote that self-improvement, the idea of building your career, doing better financially, building your body, becoming the best version of yourself. And that is great. The problem is that they're also pushing these concepts of like the only men who are worthy or have value or who can get the girl or who deserve to be at the top have swollen bank accounts and swollen bodies, right?
It's like I don't know any women who specifically want.
I'll take it back to vagina, as I always do, and because I read this part in here and I was like, that just totally obliterates the incel theory. The incel theory is something like 80% of women want 10% of men, and that's all women are attracted to, right?
And fucking no women I know.
Okay, so this talks about, again, this book being about the neural connection in a woman between her brain and her genitals, right? How connected they are. So the part of the brain that registers fear and anxiety in a woman is the same part of the brain that registers arousal and sexual attraction, right? So you cannot have both at the same time. Your fear and anxiety has to be shut down in order for you to say, I'm ready to go. I'm aroused. I'm drawn
relax, genuinely to relax.
Yeah, right? It. And so they did a study to look at, well, what causes women, what elicits that reaction in women most often? It's not muscles. It's not men dropping hundreds and hundreds of dollars of them at dinner. You know what it is? Investment behaviors. Oh, he was nice to my family when he came over for dinner. He plans dates a week ahead. He's thoughtful.
He's
me caring
to say goodnight and genuinely seems to want to.
Like behaviors that indicate to me that he is here, he's consistent, he's in it for the long haul. That turns me on. So for young men, I'm like, if you want to know how to attract a woman, why are you listening to other men? You should be listening to women.
Yeah, but
all they really want is for you to be nice to them.
Yeah,
it's that simple.
And we'll come back to the expression I love to say that I've read of, like, we live in a very homosocial society. Men look to women for intimacy, sex, and family, like child rearing. The people that they respect, that they admire, that they look up to, the ones they want to learn from, are other men. And so it's very difficult for women to be the change makers in our current climate of our society, because men are looking to the other men to guide them. And so what we really need is more men coming to the table and using their voices in positive ways.
And being that source of guidance and mentorship for young men in
healthy
ways.
So that men aren't looking for men and masculinity influencers online to be guiding them of like,
we're feeding them unattainable, unhealthy, unrealistic, and dangerous.
And if we didn't have the patriarchy saying men shouldn't emote, shouldn't be too touchy, shouldn't be too communicative, then I bet a lot more men would be having more conversations with their sons or brothers or friends. Actually, we were at our niece's birthday party this weekend, and we were having a conversation with one of the gentlemen there, and he was like,
he likes a man who likes to debate, and I appreciate that.
He wanted to know a little more about our feminist stuff.
He brought something up. I was like, what do you guys think about that?
And we had to talk to him, where we're like, more, the problem is in all these things is like, men need to be calling men out more. If one of your friends makes a derogatory comment about women, they should say something. There should be consequences to action.
We were suggesting it's not enough just to raise our boys. If you're in a position where you are raising a boy or have some influence on a young man's life, it's not enough just to raise them to be good and kind and respect women. You have to teach them that if they're in a scenario where someone else is being negative, aggressive,
or misbehaving,
a vile,
that by being silent and walking away, they are complicit in the bad behavior.
Yeah.
That you have to be using your voice, raising your voice, and holding the other men in your life accountable, saying there will be consequences. If you act like that, we won't be hanging out anymore.
It's like, all these trials that come up with like the different hockey teams and the different sexual scandals that happen. And it's like, it's not enough to just be like, oh, I saw it was going down and I left the room.
Got out of there, not for me.
No, call it out. If you are in a group like that where you have some esteem and there's maybe one or two gentlemen who's about to, misbehave in whatever particular way, you're damn right if the rest of the group was like, fucking cut it out, man.
Like, don't do
cut
that.
it out or get out of here. You don't hang out with us. They'd be like,
they would stop.
Maybe I'll behave better.
But we have pack mentalities often, and I see a lot of like really kind, lovely men that we know in our lives, and I'm like, I think you're a lovely human. I think you have the best of intentions. But
I know you would never treat someone poorly.
No, but if you were in a scenario where you saw other men acting in a certain way, you might be the one to just silently leave the situation as opposed to using your voice to say something. Now, he did say something interesting though, and he said, but I'm doing my part in my family. I'm trying to raise my boys differently. I'm making sure that they see me be emotional. They've seen me cry before. So it's the way that I interact with them. It's also the way that they see me interact with their mother in our household, to have healthy bonding and relationships, to like what it means for men and women to relate. And he also said, I also have a group chat with about 6 of my closest male friends. And if something happens in my life, I go into that conversation and I say, hey guys, I need to talk about something. And I was like, there is no step too small in this process of completely changing our societal structures, changing the way men feel and are told that they are allowed to express and emote and communicate and feel. Like, there is no step too small. And I did think that was really beautiful. I was like, you're right, that's absolutely true.
You are doing
We're working on a different scale because we have the time and energy too, and we're like really fired up about it. But no one's step is bigger or better than anyone else's, and every little bit of it leads towards change in the future generations.
It's having the conversations and sharing the knowledge, essentially. And so I wanted to read a little something while I was doing this research. I found a Stanford University article, and the title was "Men's Loneliness is a Feminist Issue in Men Without Men." And I thought, interesting, of course. Everything is a female issue. We have to handle everything. But then when I read it, it was actually very interesting. Okay, so this is, it was a research talk given to a postdoctoral fellow, Angelica Ferrara, discussing a book she was writing called Men Without Men, which examines the state of men's friendships and men's loneliness from a feminist perspective. Okay, so this woman, as a doctoral student, studied the development of feminized and masculinized speech patterns in adolescence. All right, so she noticed from this, girls who previously described their thoughts and feelings very clearly would start to become emotionally inarticulate around 13 to 14, adapting what she calls feminine language of feigning, not thinking, using phrases like, I don't know, and I guess, right? So girls that were before very sure of themselves started to do that. Whereas in boys, as they got older, they would refrain from discussing their emotions through the employ of what she deems masculine language of feigning, not feeling, using phrases like, I don't care and whatever. In line with this, along with the shifted language, she noticed that her male interview subjects who had previously spoken at great lengths about the importance of friendships in their lives, as they got older, began concealing or downplaying the significance of their friendships. So her book, Men Without Men, which isn't out yet, I searched for it, I'm very curious to read it, explores how and why such a loss occurs, right? And in her in her study, she frames this isolation as a direct product of the patriarchy, arguing the very qualities that patriarchal masculinity emphasizes are at odds with the things men most need to thrive. So patriarchal virtues of stereotypical masculinity, right? Like hyper-independence, stoicism, strength, control, and rationality. Those qualities all directly inhibit the forming of healthy friendships between men. So consequently, this manifests into social isolation, depression. We see higher amounts of suicide in young men. And ultimately, because these men who don't have friendships rely so heavily on their romantic partnerships with women to be their therapist, their friend, all the things, it leads to a higher level of domestic abuse because of that frustration, right? Who are they taking out on? The person that's closest to them, right? So there's no difference when you look between the genders when you're studying these sorts of things. All people require meaningful, close friendships to sustain their emotional and mental well-being, right? So men also hold just as deep a capacity to be able to build and maintain those relationships. They're not just without them, right? And we can see that because in boyhood, they desire that emotional intimacy and they cherish it, right? That doesn't just change as they get older. They still need those things. And one of the things she was talking about is the importance of why we want to encourage those friendships in young men is because friendships are an important place where we learn, the emotional development skills. I'm reading from notes that I made because the article was so good.
How to care about and care for people that are close to you.
How to listen, how to express solidarity with people who think and emote differently. Reciprocity, taking and giving of, oh, you've done this for me, I'll share this with you. Just honestly knowing how to care and how to show someone you care, right? So we think about like young girls in our experiences, because we value friendship so much and we source those friendships, we all have a very good base and a very strong base of empathy and care and love for one another.
Because we're taught that is our number one priority, to love and care for the people around us.
And because we feel that with each other, that bleeds out into our interactions with anyone we're coming in contact with. So it's suggesting that because men aren't being taught to value friendships and building those skills within friendships, that's why they're not able to continue carrying that into their adulthood and building strong, intimate bonds.
It's tougher to get to the top of the hierarchical triangle if you care too much about the other people that are also beside you, kind of fighting their own battle to get there, right?
Yeah.
It's like CEOs, they say CEOs have to be somewhat unfeeling because you have to put the dollar before the humans, right? And I also think when we look at, because when you were talking about this stuff, it just kept coming to my mind and kind of about something that I'm going to read that I had just found right before we actually did this. But we look at what's happening, especially in the States right now with getting rid of DEI, getting rid of gendered language, kind of taking those programs and seeing a lot of like patriarchy on the rise. And it's like, because we look at this idea of masculinity and the individualism and fighting to get to the top to be the leader, and it's like for a long time men, and predominantly white men, have really ruled and been dominant, and they've had those opportunities, and I think men are still struggling because they were told, or they were told and shown that they had a certain expectation for their life. You go, you get the school, you get the job, you work your way up, you're the leader, you do all this, and then women's equality comes in, and now you're fighting for your jobs. Then we've got DEI, and they're like, oh, we're losing out on opportunity. It's like, no, the opportunity is just being shared amongst more people. You don't have
that idea of like, if the piece of the pie, right?
Yeah,
more
like
people are taking a piece and losing my pie.
Men don't have the the upper hand on it anymore. It's being kind of spread evenly across all human beings.
Not quite evenly, but it's getting there. It's being spread.
That's the effect of it. And it's like, why would that be alarming? And why would that be against the patriarchy? Because all of a sudden we have a bunch of men who are floundering because the system has changed, but what they were taught and think and know to be what is expected of them hasn't. So they're like, wait a minute, I'm told that I still have to be this one way, but then our society is changing to not really allow for that. And I saw this woman who shared a story And I got to look more into this, but I'll just share like what she was saying. I'm like more curious about it, but that she was like, this isn't the first time there's been a male loneliness epidemic after World War I. And she was speaking about in Germany specifically. She's like, there was a lot of veterans who were like, kind of lost and lonely and didn't know, like they felt defeated. They weren't sure what their purpose was. And so at that time, a fascist government kind of came in and gave them purpose, gave them, to fight for the state, right? And in a very like toxic masculine
because who are we fighting? I was like, who are we fighting? You have to give them someone to blame.
You have to give them like a cause. You have to give them a purpose. So it was a kind of the perfect time for a government regime to come into. I thought you were going to say more to that. I didn't. Yeah.
No. What? Okay. So what it says is you have to give them.
These men felt they were lost and they felt unseen. So it gave them a commitment to the state. It gave them something to fight for. It allows them to feel powerful and have purpose. And how do you do that? Governments come together, or a leader comes together, and they blame women.
They blame give them some
immigrants. They blame the people who are too progressive and want too much change, and they say, no, let's fight for holding on to what we are.
This is your enemy. You should
hold on to our state. Be really proud. And are we not seeing that exact thing happen, in America right now and kind of worldwide? It's like we're in that same state of like, oh, men feel like they're losing out on jobs to women, to immigrants, to minority groups. But that doesn't align with what they were sold, with what they've been told and what they've seen happen for men traditionally in their lives. And so they're like, well, what's my purpose now? If I'm not the one doing the prime, like, what's my purpose? Where do I go? It's like... And that's scary. And why do we have a rise in, the masculinity and media online, especially with what's happening with the government?
They want someplace to put that blame.
And they want somewhere to put the blame. And so they're finding it. And in the change that's been done progressively in our society. And then they're giving men purpose by telling them to reclaim their, owed and rightful power.
Their manness. And I sort of to wrap this all around and, the unlocking for us in our research of, it is sort of a feminist thing because it is still about patriarchy and patriarchal structures. We saw something on Instagram yesterday, this woman, Reshma Sojani. She's a founder and CEO of Girls Who Code. And she was giving a commencement speech. And she said, I gave a commencement speech years ago at a women's college after I'd founded and got Girls Who Code off the ground, and I felt so proud, and I knew I killed it, and I got off stage, and she had 2 boys, and one of the sons says, Mom, why don't you ever talk about boys? And she said, at the time, I was like, he doesn't get it, he doesn't understand it, but he will when he's a little bit older. And then in this speech, she was saying, the more I've thought about it over the time, the more I realize, for generations now, we've had our mothers and grandmothers and any female figure in our life teaching us, telling us, urging us, don't settle. You can do better. Fight the system. You can be anything you want. Go out there and do it. Fuck the patriarchy, essentially, right? Change the structure. Go and live different lives. Choose what you want and go after it, right? So we've had that urging in our ear. I think back on my childhood, and I remember my mom saying things like, never financially rely on a man. Focus on your own life. Don't put finding a relationship first. Not that it's not great, but like really pursue yourself and focus on that. And this woman was suggesting, and it really clicked. No one has been telling boys for the last generations, fuck the patriarchy. Get out of this patriarchal system. It's okay for you to express. It's okay for you to be vulnerable. You can say when you want help. You can have friendships. Or maybe not you can build bonds.
Yeah, I think there's some women who are probably doing it, but like
perhaps in smaller ways.
But the big thing is, men aren't doing it.
So our mothers, aunts, and grandmothers, mothers, aunts, and grandmothers have been going to young women and saying, "Hey, change the system. You can do it." But fathers, uncles, and grandfathers haven't been going to the sons and saying, "Hey, fuck this system. You can change it. Let's do something different."
And where does that come back to? You're not going to advocate against something that you refuse to acknowledge in the first place. So as long as men refuse to acknowledge that patriarchy isn't them, patriarchy is a system set up that happens to traditionally benefit them, but they're
it's
two
not
different
benefiting
things.
You anymore.
And feminism especially isn't against them, it's against that structure. Yeah. If they don't also see that there's something wrong with the structure, and if they don't choose for themselves that they want to also be a part of the changing of the structure, they're not
I think
going to
they
have
do
this
though. I think they want to
conversations.
be part of the change. They don't know how, and they're not getting the clear advice, right? And so that is that concept of like, yes, feminism is great. I love how much I'm seeing women rise and just excel and build amazing lives for themselves. The problem is boys have been left behind, and now they're floundering.
Yeah.
So how do we bring them up to speed?
And we've opened up, I think, feminism a lot in the last couple of decades it needs to be intersectional. There's more than just the women, and especially just like white women, to be mindful and considerate of. And we've talked before, like if all the minority groups and all the underrepresented voices kind of joined together, like imagine what change we could make. Well, imagine if we had men who were starting to join our voices too.
Yeah.
If we had more men joining the causes to be against the structural systems that are no longer serving, I mean, were they ever, but that are no longer serving a mass population of people who are getting fed up with it.
Yeah. So no, I know the frustration with the male loneliness epidemic, because it feels like something else that's added on to the shoulder of women's is emotional labor and women's shoulders. What do they say? Yeah, emotional labor. Something else of like we're being blamed. It's our responsibility.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But we can recognize, and I think we'll be taking into consideration in our pursuit of being more intersectional to consider, okay, so in what ways can we start finding even small ways to have the conversations to encouraging more men to consider the ways that patriarchy are harming them.
And I mean, we're gonna start by sharing some resources, sharing some voices of other men that we see who are actively doing this work and putting content out. So we'll share them, and I hope you'll take a look at them. I hope you'll share them with people in your life. We're actively working on a documentary project that we're excited about that does focus on the male side of feminism and what can be done in our society to open up spaces to change.
And who is already doing that work and how it can be amplified.
To highlight
and
their
if we can
voices,
help amplify that voice, then I absolutely want to, because I believe as a feminist, yes, that is my responsibility.
But let's not forget, knowledge is power. Learning, listening, and then sharing your knowledge with other people. So let's be mindful of the fact that feminism includes the men in our life, and the
feminism is for everybody.
Yeah, it's for everybody, and let's not leave our men behind.
Yeah. Dumb. You've been listening to The Sister Strain.
If you've got something you'd like to share with us, reach out to us. contact@sisterstrain.com.
Yours in sistership, The Sister Strain.